Well, hello everyone. Here talk about right here. Talk about for working though, and a lot of times it sure seems that way. That each time we do speak about that, and you're always thinking as to where to work. Work can be a number of reasons, right? And half the time you're always want to know too. Are you really working while you're sleeping? Like whenever you're talking about working around the clock, talk about for time, right? So like it seems like to me that time is another measurement whenever it comes to understanding about what it really means, right? And a lot of times you always want to know too that why can't you use an abbreviation for a time, such as to where if there's any source a plan or agenda or any source of achievement or a goal or something like that. But I'm just showing you right here this example right here of this of the talk about the seal right here, talk about for the American eagle right here. But I'm using these feathers right here as another way of how do you want to call it, the span of time. And so whenever I zoom in right here, you can actually see right here on the eagle right here that whenever I zoom in right here, that you can actually see that that right here that the spot from where like the feathers are. But talk about for I am free, and then on this side right here I included it right here. All we do is work. And so on this side that I'm like like on this side I can add on here that you say something like all we do is work, but I put on here, but we can make a time later. So every time, so it sure seems that way that every time you do say something like that, and half the time you're always want to know too, what exactly is it that person is saying necessarily to word okay later, and so it's like so every time you hear somebody say something like that, and you're always want to know too that a lot of times you actually say it, right? You don't actually write it down. And so you want to know too that really is there really a difference there when we do talk about saying something and compared to actually writing it down. And you always want to know too that when we do talk about any source of agenda, right? And you're always thinking as to where the number of times that you've had these discussions whenever it comes to getting something done, a lot of times it sure seems that way. They go, so I'll go ahead and put on here. I wrote this like like the feathers, right? But like everybody says, toward it, whenever you do say stuff like, if you're going to be working all the time, doing something all the time, working on a time, and you're not going to be very flexible whenever it comes to making an opportunity for somebody just to be able to listen to somebody talk. And a lot of times it's like so it's like here lately it seems like that here lately it seems like that time. And if I could just write on here like everybody else might say that what's a good way of how to explain time right here, what's a good abbreviation for time. And you always want to know too is toward the the equal opportunity. The equal opportunities. And equal opportunities. And I operate. I think anyway. Opportunities. I'll go ahead and put an O right there. For opportunities. But so would you say something like that? Talk about for opportunities, right? And so like every time you do think about that, and you're always want to know too that that why every time you think about that, and you're always thinking as to where what exactly does time necessarily mean? And if you were to think about that, birds on a feather. The birds on a feather are another way of how you want to cause this toward the measure of the hours of the day to where that you have about maybe 12 hours a day to where that you have where you're real busy with something, or maybe a lot of things that maybe you just don't want to do, or maybe the things that come up to where maybe if you had to, I'm like, yeah. So it's like, so every time you do think about that, and you're thinking as toward it, what exactly does that mean when we do speak about time, right? So it's like every time you think about time, no, are we necessarily thinking about any sorts of opportunities, like talk about for I am free, or yeah, that this time, like, so yeah, so I mentioned before, I've talked about for 12 hours right here, but it sure seems that way that every time you do think about that, and you're always thinking as to where that almost all the time, that whenever you try to set time to get something done, it sure seems that way to where, what's the best way of how to get somebody to get something done. And a lot of times it's like, yeah, what I usually see though are examples. You show somebody an example of what something looks like. Yeah, so a lot of times it's like, yeah, show somebody an example of something. So a lot of times it's like, yeah, it's an example. And so it's like, yeah, so every time you do think about that, and you always want to know too that, yeah, that, whenever you're going to be saying something like, yeah, you're always busy, you're always working all the time, all we do is work. All we do is like, yeah, we can make time later on, but all we do is work. So every time you think about your tax documents, a lot of times, every time you think about, wanting to do something special for somebody, and it sure seems that way that every time you do think about that, it's like all you do is work. And so it's like, yeah, so every time you do think about that, and you're always want to know too that yeah, whenever stuff gets postponed, and whenever stuff, whenever we're talking about for opportunities, right? But it sure seems that way that every time you do think about that, and you're always want to know too, is toward it. Number one, part of my study will be is toward it. Yeah, while you were asleep, while I was sleeping, and like everybody else might even say that, okay, what is that really supposed to mean? While you were sleeping, yeah, while I was sleeping. While you were asleep, that there's been some updates going on. So yeah, so it's like, so every time you do think about that, and almost all the time, everybody, that every time you think about that, and every time you do think about that, and you pretty much have to say is to where that, yeah, while you were sleeping, that there's been progress that was made. So it's like, yeah, so I guess you can look at it that way too, as to where yeah, progress has been made. Yeah, progress. And so every time you think about that, and like everybody else would even say, is to where that yeah, that from all the work that you've been doing, the work that you work so hard for, out of your whole weekly schedule, and sure seems that way that whenever things don't work out the way that you would on the work, for sure, it sure seems that way that all that data has been erased, or that yeah, that your things didn't work out as well as you thought that they would work out. So it sure seems that way that that every time we do think about it, it's like, yeah, all we do is work. We can make time later. So if you were to actually be writing down notes about something, and you're always 102, what is the best way of how to show accomplishments? And a lot of times it sure seems that way, that talk about for keeping something in mind, right? But every time I think about that, and I'm always thinking as to where that yeah, when we do speak about work all the time, work, but it sure seems that way that every time you do think about that, and you're thinking as to where that yeah, that whenever we do speak about work a lot of times, it's like, yeah, It pretty much means is to where that you're going to be busy to the point to where that you don't have an open mind to listen to somebody else, and if you have somebody else looking at your work and then thinking as to where looking over what is it that you're working on necessarily, and so to me it sure seems that way that yeah you go ahead and write a few things, and it's like yeah you go ahead and on here you go ahead and write a few things right here, but then you want to go ahead and show somebody okay, well really that can you go ahead and show me could you go ahead and just paint something, paint me a picture and I can see what is it that you're doing. And so it sure seems that way that yeah so it's like yeah can you paint me a picture of something or something like that. So half the time it sure seems that way that every time I do think about that, and you're always 102 that what is it, what exactly is it that when we talk about working all the time, whenever you're working all the time, especially like everybody else may say, is to where especially if you're going to be there are times to where you're going to be drifting off to sleep. You're going to be drifting off to sleep while you're working. You're going to be overly exhausted while you're working, and you're going to be working so hard to the point to where that you're going to start drifting off to sleep, right? And like everybody else might say, is to where that that's not called working, that's called sleeping. But really though, that when we do speak about time, though, and that you're always 102, is toward all the hard work that you put into something, especially, and you're always 102, that some of it seems to be all erased just because of the fact that that yeah some of that work didn't do no good, or if anything the things didn't work out as well as what you expected. But still that one thing that I did mention before too of talking about special things. And so at this right here, if you would actually be working on something and helping somebody out, and I talk about for special things, right? Special things. And special things right here. And so it sure seems that way that when we do think about that, and 102 is toward all we do is work right here. But it sure seems that way that when we do talk about special things, right? And at 102 exactly what exactly is it that that you were working on, and like and also that if somebody asks you for a favor, especially, but it sure seems that way that when we do speak about that is toward it talking about for really all we do is work. Really what all has been accomplished from all the hard work that you put into something. To me though it sure seems that way that when we do speak about time. And but the way I think about too is toward that when we do speak about time, that it's another study about is just toward it it's like a measurement. And to me though I look at that more like a measurement. If you want another word for time, it's a measurement. And I look at that more like a measurement. So in case if anybody were to ask me that what do you when we do speak about time, whenever we do speak about time, that what's another way of how you want to call is to where that talk about for time. It's another way of how do you want to call it, for measurement. And with that measurement, would be is to where that for special things. And but still that all we do is work. Well, what exactly does that mean? Well, it pretty much means is to where that it seems like that to where that making sure that the job gets done, number one, but then also is to where to think about is to where that all the hard work that you put into something, right?